So hello everyone, bonjour. My name is Lise Brin. I'm a program officer at CARL, the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. Before we get started, I am going to right away take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous land on which I live and work. And I hope that you will give some thought to the land you are on, its people, and its history. I live and work in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I try to always keep this in mind and keep in mind that this territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, and that I have a role to play in safeguarding this land and in upholding the treaties by which we are all bound. As we often hear, we are all treaty people. So today's repository community call is on the topic of electronic theses and dissertations, or as we often call them, ETDs. I'm sure we'll be hearing that a lot today. So for those of you who were on the call back in September, the DSpace Anonymous call, you might recall that this topic came up, and we thought that it would be a really good one for this community to get together and discuss. Please note, all participants were muted upon entry, and you may use the chat feature to bring technical difficulties to our attention or to share comments and resources. This is a community call, but we do have 3 brief presentations to get us started. So there'll be time for the presentations, and then later on time for discussion featuring all of you. CARL is committed to providing a welcoming, safe, and harassment-free environment for everyone on this call. And we ask you to read and comply with our CARL Code of Conduct. I'll post that in just a second in the chat so you can have a look at it. And so finally, I would like to introduce our speakers. We have today with us, first off, Arlene Whetter and Katherine Clifton from Library and Archives Canada. Arlene is the team leader, Published Heritage, and Katherine is the acquisitions librarian, both in the Published Heritage branch at Library and Archives Canada. Secondly, we'll have Jeanette Hatherill, who's the scholarly communication librarian at the University of Ottawa. And finally, we'll have Laurence Charest, who's a librarian, Direction du traitement documentaire et métadonnées at Université de Montréal. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to Arlene and Katherine.
Hello, bonjour. First of all, thanks to Lise and to the group for inviting us to present today. The sound and the picture are all okay? Okay. My name is Arlene Whetter, and I work at Library and Archives Canada as a team lead in the Digital Legal Deposit unit. We are responsible for the acquisition of digital publications for the library collection, that being all Canadian ebooks, serials, and government publications, subject to legal deposit, as well as being operationally responsible for the Theses Canada program. I'm presenting today with my colleague, Katherine Clifton, who is the acquisitions librarian who has been working full-time with us for the past 10 months, harvesting these theses. Je suis désolée que ces diapos soient seulement en anglais. Je pourrais les traduire après si quelqu'un aimerait les avoir en français. Alors dites-moi par courriel si c'est le cas. Okay. I'll start with a status update. After a few fraught years, we are thrilled that all of our systems are implemented and all of the workflows on the journey from the university repository to our catalog are now fully developed. We have been onboarding universities for almost a year now, and we have harvested 20 universities to date, with several more in progress at varying stages. We started with universities that worked out of the box, so to say, or that required tweaks that we felt we were able to handle. So this is how we're selecting universities to harvest first. As we go along and as we gain more experience in solving the problems, we're starting to tackle repositories now that require more troubleshooting. In August, we finally completed the workflow to send MARC records to OCLC for our catalog and WorldCat. And we're proceeding cautiously on that front so that we don't cause problems in WorldCat with duplicates or improperly merged records. So far, the results have been good, and we've loaded 4 universities. And I expect that this number will increase quickly since we've now, just over the past couple of weeks, sorted out our most recent problem, and we plan to proceed with loading new sets of records every week now. I want to quickly mention the MOA, which is the Memorandum of Agreement that most universities signed 5 years ago. We do have a new version ready for universities to sign. So you will be hearing from us over the next week or so, and then over the next few months, we'll try to get all of these new MOAs signed. The new MOA will expire March 2025. I have to say that it's great to no longer have thousands of paper student licenses arriving at our office, and I hope it's equally great on the part of the university that they no longer have to send them. So this slide is just a high-level overview. I'm not sure if the is the Zoom camera bit covering the slide, or can you?
Nope, we're good.
Oh, good. Okay.
You're
all right.
Next to the slides, so it's perfect.
Okay, great. This slide is just a high-level overview of our process. So we harvest the ETDMS metadata from your thesis set in your repository. Then our system reads the metadata to follow the URLs to download the files, and we'll download PDFs as well as any supplementary files that might be included, such as video, photos, or data. Our harvesting workflow was developed using a system called GoAnywhere MFT, and it obtains the metadata and files. It organizes them and sends them on to our Preservica preservation repository. We then have a second harvesting workflow that transforms those MODS records that are in Preservica into MARC. So the metadata goes through 2 transformations. And then we have the file of MARC records, which we load to the catalog. Okay. There we go. Regarding the ETDMS metadata, we can now handle both ETDMS 1.0 and 1.1. And I noticed that Marie-Hélène from Université de Montréal is on the line. Marie-Hélène, we can now handle your 1.1 if you want to send it. We do specify some mandatory fields which are needed to produce our MARC records. So my column went wonky a bit at the bottom there, but Katherine will mention those later on. So I'll just carry on. This is a closer look at our harvesting workflow on GoAnywhere. We have over a dozen modules in the workflow, which will harvest and split the ETDMS metadata into individual files, download the resource files, transform the ETDMS to MODS, identify errors and create reports, arrange the metadata and files into folders by university and author name, and then send the organized folders to Preservica. These are just a couple of screenshots from our Preservica collection. Preservica is a fairly new system, a new acquisition for LAC. We acquired it to use for all of our digital collections on both the archive and library sides of the shop. And the theses are the very first collection to be launched in Preservica, our first production use of the system, although many other uses are in development. Preservica is a cloud-based system with built-in redundancy and many cool active preservation features, such as the ability to create new manifestations of the files, such as a display version, a preservation version, and does regular integrity checks. Our thesis collection, as you can see here, is arranged by university with a folder for each student under that, and then the files in the folder. For those of you who are interested in the metadata, here's an example of, my columns didn't work when I transferred it to Google Slides, I see from the PowerPoint. So it's going off the screen there. But for those of you who are interested in the metadata, here's an example of a MARC record after its final transformation from MODS. I've highlighted some of the fields in red, and these are some of the fields that we would automatically add in the transformation, such as our collection codes, place of publication. Off the screen, there's a note that indicates that the metadata was harvested from participating institutions rather than being an originally cataloged record, and so on. The final step in all of this is to make the theses available to the public in a central repository. We are now loading the records to our catalog. So eventually all theses records will be found in our Aurora catalog as well as WorldCat. Once in the catalog, an overnight process exports the records to our Theses Canada search portal, which is a dedicated interface to the theses available on our website. The new LAC URLs for resources that are housed in Preservica will lead to a new style of landing page, which looks like the screenshot that I've got here. And if there are multiple files associated with the thesis, they will be listed here on this landing page with an individual link to open each file. So I'll hand things over now to Katherine, who will take us through the steps of onboarding the universities.
Great. So step one is to test harvest. So our first step is to do an OAI PMH query to look at the metadata in the repository. This is pretty straightforward. We look at the for the ETDMS format and make sure that it contains required fields such as author, title, degree info, publication info, and a direct link to the PDF. We communicate with the universities if we encounter any problems or just to let them know that things are looking good. I then look through the repository to find a date range that will be good for a sample upload. Typically, any date range that contains about 100 to 200 theses uploads works. Using a test environment, I run two different kinds of sample harvests. One sample harvest is designed to actually pick up PDF files and move them to Preservica with their accompanying records. This shows that we can successfully connect to the repository and download the files. It also allows us to get an impression of what our complete Preservica harvest will look like and flags problems we might encounter with file name URLs. We sometimes will run a full test harvest of an entire repository if the university requests it in order to identify all URL issues so they can be corrected. The other sample harvest is designed to generate a sample of what the MARC records will look like in a final harvest when they will eventually be available in WorldCat. So example test onboarding university workflow in GoAnywhere MFT. So these screenshots show the test harvest for sample MARC records. We have a spreadsheet with all of the specifications for each repository, including some extra fields that the workflow will insert into the MARC records, such as the place of publication. We select the university by row number, set the date parameters of the harvest, and the workflow in GoAnywhere will produce a MARC file. Once we have these samples, we quality check both types of harvest to ensure everything worked out, and we are ready to proceed. We then contact the universities with our results and ask permission to begin a full harvest of their thesis repository. So step two is harvesting and quality assurance. When this testing and communication is done, we go ahead and start harvesting in full. This process can take anywhere from minutes to several days, depending on the size of the repository. So once we have all of our theses harvested in Preservica, we go through the harvest and we quality check our theses metadata, as well as the PDFs to make sure they're matching and functional. We then review our error reports, which inform us of any files that might have failed to download or problems that might have occurred during the harvest. Once all of our quality checking has been completed, we compose an email with the results of the harvest and inform the university that their reharvest has been completed. This is also the time where we would let them know of any issues that might have been noticed in our quality checking so they can be corrected in time for our next harvest. So right here, this is an example of what the mods records look like in Preservica. It includes the data crosswalk from the ETDMS record, as well as other data added by our workflow. Okay, so step three is records being sent to OCLC and moving our into our permanent collection area. So once we have quality checked our harvest, confirmed it looks good, and got in contact with the university, we move these theses from our workspace in Preservica to our actual collection space in Preservica. Once our theses are in our collection, we make sure to fill out the stat sheets so we have all our crucial information about past harvests stored in one place. This includes number of theses harvested, date ranges harvested, date of last harvest, and error rate. We then run a metadata harvest of our Preservica collection, which includes a workflow to transform the mods to MARC records. These MARC records are proofread one more time for safety and then sent to OCLC and made available in WorldCat. We also analyze the OCLC loading reports to ensure we are happy with the results. So typical issues we encounter, I'll just kind of describe some of the many things we troubleshoot daily. The most frequently encountered issue is missing degree fields. We have a few required fields, namely title, name, publisher, date, degree name, degree grantor, location URL, and language. This issue is typically noticed quite early on, and we typically resolve this issue by contacting the university and letting them know about an absence. We have found that universities are always really cooperative and willing to make additions where necessary, which we really appreciate. And another very common issue relating to this is a lack of a direct URL to the PDF document in the metadata. Sometimes in the place of a location URL, universities will attach a link to the page where the PDF is found, but unfortunately, we do need a direct link to Harvest. Another example of a problem we have encountered a few times is an issue where encoded URLs redirect to unencoded URLs, which results in our harvester being unable to pick them up properly if there's a space or other problematic characters in the URL. This also is resolved by just contacting the university and letting them know that even though their URLs and their records are great, they are redirecting to other not so great URLs. From there, universities are able to make a change so we can pick up these files in the future. And again, we would just like to stress how appreciative we are to all universities for their continued cooperation. We are very thankful to everyone for making these modifications so that we can solve these issues. So this is a glimpse of one of our error reports, which will flag problems in the URL, just to show you there. And universities harvested to date. So here we've listed all the universities that we have harvested to date. I won't read them, but you can look at them on the screen there. And universities in progress. This is a list of universities that we're currently working on, and we will continue to work with every university in the program to bring them on board. So here we have the Theses Canada website linked for you. So we have an information for universities page on our website, which includes general information on how to participate, as well as our harvesting requirements. And then the final slide here is our email addresses. That concludes our presentation. Thank you all very much for your time, and to any staff of our participating universities that might be here today. Thank you so much for your participation and cooperation. We really couldn't do any of this work without your collaboration, and we really appreciate it. If any of you do have any questions or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Katherine and Arlene. Yeah, that was great. Thank you for all that detail. I know there are some questions for you. There's already one in the chat, but we're going to save those questions for after the 3 presentations. I am keeping track of them. I think I was meant to have the Q&A function enabled, but I think it's not. So I think questions are going to have to go into the chat. And there is a question, I will mention this one. Christy is asking, could you put that link to information for universities into the chat box for everyone? That would be helpful. But yeah, now we're going to hand over to Jeanette, I believe.
Great, thank you. So I'll just get my, hopefully, screen sharing going here. Okay, let's see now if I can make this big. Yes. How's that?
Perfect.
Excellent. Right, so from the national to the hyperlocal, I'm going to talk about just what our thesis process looks like at the University of Ottawa, just in case it's of use, or maybe just to kind of spark some discussion later on in the discussion period. So a little bit of background, because it helps to explain how our workflow is. I don't want to go too far back, but you may recall everyone back in 2008, 2009, 10, when our institutional repositories were all new and shiny because LAC was moving to electronic theses deposit. So obviously our first partnership for our institutional repository was with our Faculty of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies to do a pilot project for a year, make sure that everything worked well before doing a mandatory electronic thesis submission beginning in about 2011. So it ran pretty smoothly for about 5 years or so, with the Faculty of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies kind of doing the verification of all of the deposits into the institutional repository at the same time that they were verifying the student had met their graduation requirements. So they were doing that in kind of a parallel process. And then in about 2016, 2017, I will call it the year of too many changes. The university decided to reorganize and disband the Faculty of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies to decentralize responsibilities for graduate studies into all of the 10 faculties. And at the same time, they introduced a new student information system. So there was a lot going on in that year, and there was a lot of change technologically, socially, politically, that had an impact on how we kind of operated. So we were successful in making our case to the central administration, basically begging them not to decentralize the thesis deposit process to 10 different faculties, because there was just no way we would be able to do any sort of quality assurance. So we made the case that that responsibility should belong to the library. And so we were able to get the equivalent of sort of a full-time position that was in the graduate studies faculty transferred to the library, which we then split into kind of 2 positions within the library for thesis management and sort of metadata technician as well. Less winning, we were less successful at taking advantage of the sort of technological change to integrate, you know, some aspects of the institutional repository and the student information system. I mean, it's understandable, there was a lot going on, but the FGPS had a bit of a, if it ain't broke, don't fix it attitude to our thesis deposit process, which is great. I mean, it showed that that the IR was very appreciated, but we kind of lost an opportunity to explore how we could kind of better integrate 2 systems on campus. But in any case, the processus de soumission des thèses que nous avons adopté depuis 2016-2017 et que les bureaux d'études supérieures dans chaque unité ou dans chaque faculté s'occupent de l'approbation de la thèse finale, alors tous les processus nécessaires pour la collation des grades, et ensuite il inscrit une note dans le dossier de l'étudiant indiquant que l'étudiant est permis de déposer leur thèse dans Recherche UO, qui est notre dépôt institutionnel. Alors, c'est un petit code qui est mis dans le dossier de l'étudiant dans le système d'information de l'étudiant. Depuis là, c'est notre équipe qui s'assure que les métadonnées et les fichiers PDF sont conformes. Et je vais entrer un peu plus en détail dans les prochaines sections sur les responsabilités de la bibliothèque dans ce processus. Mais quand ils ont fini leur travail et le dépôt est finalisé, notre équipe inscrit une autre code, une cote dans le dossier, pardon, quand le dépôt est finalisé. Et ensuite, c'est le bureau d'études supérieures qui recommande l'étudiant à la collation des grades. Alors, il y a beaucoup de collaboration étroite entre les facultés et la bibliothèque pour la continuation des dossiers des étudiants. So how is the library, sort of what processes does the library take care of? Obviously the thesis verification, right? So we ensure that, that the thesis as deposited is conformed to all of our requirements. So this is taken care of in our content and access division, which is like our collections division. And as I mentioned earlier, we have two staff members, Claude and Johan, who take care of this, and they kind of switch off from one day to the next, right? So they equally kind of share the work, because it is work that can be a bit long, so or repetitive. So it's a nice way to kind of share out the work. So half of their time is kind of devoted to the thesis process, and then the rest of their time is devoted to other metadata responsibilities in the department. So the basic verification that gets done is that, you know, the title page, file name, pagination are all correct. There's no personal information, sort of signatures or email addresses, whatnot, in the actual thesis file. A verification that the student and supervisor name corresponds to what's in the student information system. And then what I would sort of characterize as some light copyright. So we're not verifying whether the students are, we sort of rely more on the information that we provide at thesis submission and the agreement in the license to kind of do the copyright risk mitigation. But for example, they will check if there is a thesis by article. If an entire article is included, they'll just make sure that it is sort of an open access article that they are allowed to put in. Otherwise, they'll ask them to kind of go back and make it into a manuscript format. Another library process related to theses is embargo management. So when an embargo is approved by the faculty, and these can be for 6 months up to 5 years, they send an email. Claude and Johan can then verify that the student does have permission to have an embargo on their thesis at the time that it's been deposited. And then once they approve the final version into the institutional repository, they email me, the scholarly communication librarian, to basically do a pretty manual process. We have a specific embargo collection. And so I go into DSpace, I move the item from the regular thesis collection to the embargo collection, and that one doesn't get harvested. So none of those records are harvested, for example, by LAC, or won't be once we get, once we finish setting up our process. And then periodically I'll just go back when there are a few that embargoes have been expired. I simply just move those back into the regular collection again. The other library process is obviously the cataloging process. And I'm going to put a huge caveat here that I am not a cataloging or metadata librarian. I do not have those talents and that attention to detail. I salute my colleagues who do. I am speaking on behalf of my colleague, Jeff Pitlato today, who is the expert in this type of work. So apologies if anything is really confusing, or I hope not wrong. But if you have questions that I can't answer during the Q&A, I'm happy to put you in touch with Jeff for more details. So he harvests from our IR on a monthly basis using OAI PMH and MARC edit. Then uses a crosswalk in MARC edit to convert the DC to MARC. Of course, being a bilingual institution, we have both English and French records. So it means that, you know, it doesn't automatically generate English and French files, but Jeff's sort of created he manually splits the two based on the MARC field, or sorry, there's a field. I'm not going to say MARC or DC, I forget which one he told me, but he'll separate those out. And then he's created like a list of tasks in MARC Edit that get run to kind of do the translation of those fields into the appropriate language. Then he'll do a comparison between that kind of MARC record and what's in the IR to verify that supervisor, degree, and department are correct, because those aren't always neatly ported over for some reason. And then finally, all of that gets imported into ALMA, our new, anybody who's familiar with the Ontario consortium to do that shared catalog, we're a part of that. So he'll use ALMA to do any final edits necessary. So yeah, so that's pretty much the process. There are some limitations. Alors, je suggère peut-être des améliorations qu'on pourrait faire. Comme j'ai dit, on n'a aucune intégration avec notre système d'information d'étudiants. Qui n'est pas super grave, mais le fait que c'est une saisie manuelle de données par les étudiants, quand ces informations existent déjà dans un autre système, je trouve pas idéal, mais je ne sais pas s'il y a quelque chose qu'on pourrait faire à un autre moment, mais je suis toujours, I'm always hopeful. Le fait de l'accessibilité, on a des faiblesses. Je suis honnête qu'avec 10 facultés ainsi qu'un bureau, un office de notre vice-provost à études supérieures et postdoctorales, il y a une coordination à travers l'université immense pour communiquer avec les étudiants, et on n'est pas toujours... c'est pas toujours un succès. Alors, j'aimerais bien travailler un peu plus étroitement avec mes collègues dans la bibliothèque qui sont experts en accessibilité pour trouver une façon de bien communiquer avec les étudiants au début de leur programme, de comment créer des documents accessibles. Parce que leur demander de créer un document accessible à la fin de la création de leur thèse n'est pas juste. C'est trop de travail, ça doit être fait au début. Alors, j'espère. Le processus manuel d'embargo, j'ai aucune idée comment le faire autrement. S'il y a des suggestions, je suis à l'écoute. Et finalement, une coordination interne. Je pense que ça roule bien, mais il y a toujours une amélioration à apporter à nos processus, et on vient de finir un renouvellement organisationnel avec des différents rôles, des différentes responsabilités. Alors, j'aimerais prendre avantage de ce changement pour trouver des façons d'améliorer nos processus. So on that, I will say these are the questions I would love to discuss in our discussion period, and I will hand it back over to Lise for our next speaker.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. Yeah, that was great. I think we'll definitely get some questions about that a little later on, but let us move directly into our last presentation by Laurence from Université de Montréal. So I will pass it over to you, Laurence.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Alors, bonjour, je vais partager mon écran. Ce sera pas bien. Est-ce que ça fonctionne?
Oui, je ne sais pas si tu peux mettre ça en mode...
Présentation, oui, bien sûr. Voilà. Donc, je suis bien contente de me joindre à vous aujourd'hui. C'est le premier community call auquel j'assiste, donc je suis contente de me joindre à la communauté. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous parler principalement de l'utilisation d'un API de WorldCat pour verser nos notices de notre dépôt institutionnel Papyrus sur WorldCat, principalement pour les thèses et mémoires pour aujourd'hui. Avant, je voulais quand même vous donner un petit aperçu du schéma interne de métadonnées sur DSpace, qui est notre plateforme pour le dépôt institutionnel. On utilise différents éléments de plusieurs schémas de métadonnées, que ce soit le Dublin Core qualifié, ETDs, certains éléments maison, ou des éléments open air, surtout pour les articles, pas vraiment pour les thèses et mémoires. Donc, je voulais vous montrer un exemple de ce que les métadonnées ont l'air sur DSpace, sur Papyrus. Voilà, donc je pense qu'il n'y a rien d'exotique. Vous pouvez voir un peu ce qu'on a, des sujets, des mots-clés. Ici, les éléments ETDs dont je parlais. Voilà. Donc, nous, à l'Université de Montréal, ça fait quand même un certain temps qu'on a fait aussi un schéma de correspondance vers le format MARC, simplement pour verser nos notices de thèse et mémoire dans notre ancien outil de découverte avec Primo. Donc, mes collègues ont travaillé ça au fil du temps, un schéma de correspondance assez complexe pour permettre de produire des notices au format MARC 21 de qualité et qui permettent de répondre aux besoins des usagers qui utilisent le catalogue. Donc, on a eu un changement de paradigme au cours de la dernière année. J'imagine que plusieurs sont au courant. L'ensemble des bibliothèques des universités québécoises a passé à une plateforme partagée de services. Donc, on est passé avec le fournisseur OCLC WMS, WorldCat Management Services. Ça ne veut plus revenir en arrière. Je suis désolée. OK. Donc, voilà. Alors, c'est sûr qu'avec ce passage-là à la plateforme partagée de services, on avait un nouvel outil de découverte qui était Discovery d'OCLC. Et puis, ça change un peu la façon de procéder pour le versement des notices au catalogue, puisqu'on doit maintenant avoir des notices sur WorldCat pour pouvoir les afficher à notre communauté. Ce qui est important de savoir, c'est qu'avant de transitionner vers WorldCat Management Services, on utilisait quand même un outil développé par OCLC pour moissonner notre dépôt institutionnel et créer des notices sur WorldCat. C'est l'outil Digital Collection Gateway. Par contre, au moment de la transition, on s'est vite rendu compte que ces notices-là ne permettaient pas de mettre en valeur les thèses et mémoires sur l'outil de découverte, ni le reste de la production de notre communauté. Donc, je vais vous montrer un exemple ici d'une notice sur notre instance de Discovery, donc Sophia. On voit que c'est assez sommaire comme notice, et puis surtout le type de document indiqué, document d'archives téléchargeable, ne permet pas vraiment de raffiner par facette au niveau du type de document, parce que c'est une thèse ou un mémoire, on n'est pas trop sûr d'après la notice, donc vous voyez que c'est assez sommaire. C'est sûr qu'il est possible de paramétrer cet outil-là pour que les notices MARC soient plus riches que ça sur le catalogue. Mais nous, comme on avait déjà des belles notices MARC produites par le schéma de correspondance dont j'ai brièvement parlé, on s'est dit pourquoi ne pas les utiliser. Et la façon de faire ça avec WMS et WorldCat, c'est de passer par les API d'OCLC. Donc, je vais vous montrer un exemple d'une notice qu'on a versée de cette façon-là. En fait, c'est le même document. Et puis, on voit que la notice est beaucoup plus riche. On voit clairement quel est le domaine d'études et de complétion de maîtrise. Et on a différents types de regroupements possibles avec nos informations locales, le résumé dans les 2 langues. Et puis, on a aussi récemment paramétré une personnalisation du lien URL. Donc, c'est vraiment plus clair pour les usagers qui se dirigent vers le dépôt institutionnel. Maintenant, je vais vous parler un peu de l'API qu'on utilise, qui est le WorldCat Metadata API, qui permet d'intervenir sur les notices bibliographiques, les notices de données locales et de fonds locaux aussi sur WorldCat. Donc, je ne sais pas si vous êtes familier avec la façon de procéder pour le catalogage avec OCLC, mais il y a vraiment une distinction entre les notices maîtresses sur WorldCat qui peuvent être utilisées par toutes les institutions membres et les notices qui sont vraiment spécifiques à l'institution qu'on doit mettre dans des notices de données locales. Ces notices-là peuvent aussi être enrichies, mais en fait, on peut intervenir sur ces notices-là avec le WorldCat Metadata API. Bien entendu, ce n'est pas n'importe qui peut interagir avec ces API-là. Il faut avoir des clés qui nous sont fournies par OCLC pour pouvoir les utiliser. Donc, j'ai mis aussi un lien vers la documentation d'OCLC des API. C'est en développement, c'est de plus en plus étoffé, donc si ça vous intéresse, je vous invite à la consulter. Et puis moi, pour le versement de nos notices de thèse et mémoire sur WorldCat, j'utilise l'intégration de l'API à l'outil MARC-Edit, qui est un incontournable pour le catalogage. Donc, je vous ai mis ici, il y a un webinaire qui a été fait par le développeur de MARC-Edit récemment sur cette intégration-là. Donc, comme on l'a déjà vu avec la présentation des collègues à BAC, il faut toujours travailler avec ce qui existe sur WorldCat pour éviter de créer des doublons ou de créer une notice qui sera éventuellement fusionnée avec une autre qui existe déjà sur WorldCat. Donc, c'est vraiment important d'analyser premièrement ce qui existe en ce moment sur OCLC avant de verser nos notices de thèse et mémoire. Donc, avec l'implantation, avec l'API, on peut télécharger les notices existantes sur WorldCat avec une action GET. On peut aussi les remplacer avec une action PUT. Donc, pour moi, pour remplacer les notices existantes qui avaient été créées par l'outil Digital Collection Gateway, j'ai utilisé un match sur l'identifiant handle qui est assigné à tous les documents hébergés sur Papyrus. C'est aussi présent dans les liens URL qui étaient dans les 856 des notices bibliographiques. Donc, c'est vraiment facile d'établir un match avec ça, un match unique. Avec l'API, on peut aussi verser les notices, des nouvelles notices sur WorldCat et intervenir sur les données locales, comme j'ai déjà dit. Donc, ce qui est important de comprendre aussi, c'est que moi, je travaille toujours à partir des notices au format MARC 21 qui ont été produites avec le schéma de correspondance dont j'ai déjà parlé. Et ce processus-là a été programmé par ma collègue que vous connaissez, je crois, Marie-Hélène Vézina. Donc, je ne parlerai pas vraiment de cette partie-là, mais si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas et on pourra vous mettre en contact si nécessaire. OK. Alors, comme j'ai dit, on peut remplacer les notices qui existent sur WorldCat à partir de la présence du 001 dans la notice, qui est le numéro d'identification des notices OCLC. Quand il y a un 001 dans une notice qu'on soumet à l'API pour versement sur WorldCat, ça va automatiquement remplacer intégralement cette notice-là par la notice qu'on lui soumet. Donc, il faut être prudent, bien évidemment. Et OCLC a quand même mis certaines conditions pour le remplacement pour effectuer un contrôle. Donc, les zones doivent nécessairement correspondre entre la notice qu'on soumet et la notice qui existe sur WorldCat dans le cas de zones bien précises. Donc, des zones de contrôle avec des dates d'ajout au fichier, des choses comme ça. Le 040 en MARC, qui est en fait les bibliothèques qui ont contribué à cette notice-là. Donc, il faut toujours faire attention pour ne pas remplacer des modifications qui auraient pu être apportées par d'autres bibliothèques. Alors, c'est toujours à considérer quand on fait des interactions avec l'API d'OCLC. Il y a aussi une validation qui est effectuée sur les notices. Si vous êtes certain qui cataloguez sur WMS, vous savez que la validation d'OCLC est assez stricte au niveau de la cohérence interne. Donc, il doit nécessairement il y a certaines zones qui ne peuvent pas aller l'une sans l'autre, par exemple, au format MARC. Donc, l'API vérifie ça quand on soumet des notices. Il y a aussi certaines autres choses, comme les mots-clés dans les 653 ne peuvent pas être des doublons, et la validation ignore les diacritiques. Donc ça nous a posé problème au départ parce que nous, on a des mots-clés à la fois en anglais et en français dans nos notices de thèse et mémoire. Donc, par exemple, évaluation et evaluation sont considérés comme étant le même mot et ça bloque le versement. Donc, l'API va vraiment évaluer une notice à la fois. Et puis, si une des notices ne passe pas, ça va complètement bloquer le versement de cette notice-là. À la fin, on reçoit un rapport d'erreur, puis on peut intervenir sur les notices pour permettre de les reverser par la suite. Alors, là, il est déjà 12h51. Je voulais quand même vous donner un petit aperçu de ces intégrations-là sur MarcEdit, pour ceux qui ne sont peut-être pas si familiers que ça avec cet outil-là. Donc, comme j'ai dit, on peut télécharger des notices. Ce que j'aime avec MarcEdit, c'est vraiment que ça nous offre une interface pour faire des interactions avec l'API. Alors, c'est plus intuitif, puis ça permet de voir vraiment ce qu'on fait sur les notices. Donc ici, comme j'ai dit, ça prend des clés pour l'utilisation des API. Donc, il faut nécessairement les inscrire ici dans les préférences de MarcEdit pour pouvoir avoir accès à ces menus-là. Donc ici, on peut télécharger des notices en lot. Donc, c'est une action GET avec l'API. Il n'y a pas beaucoup d'index qu'on peut interroger, mais c'est quand même bien. Moi, dans le fond, j'ai une table de correspondance entre mes identifiants handle pour les thèses et mémoires dans Papyrus et la notice OCLC, le numéro de notice OCLC. Donc, ça me permet de télécharger les notices à mettre à jour lors des mises à jour. Aussi, comme j'ai dit, pour nous assurer que la notice soumise pour remplacer celle qui existe déjà sur WorldCat puisse passer, il faut intégrer certaines zones des notices existantes dans la nouvelle notice. Et il y a quelque chose sur MarcEdit qui nous permet de faciliter ça, c'est l'outil de Merge Records. Donc, en ajoutant l'identifiant handle des documents Papyrus dans une zone particulière au format MARC, on peut forcer le merge, donc la fusion des deux notices, à partir de cet identifiant-là. Ce qui nous permet, par exemple, de sélectionner un fichier extrait de Papyrus de notre dépôt institutionnel et les mêmes notices qui viennent d'OCLC et les enregistrer ailleurs. Puis, on peut ajouter les zones nécessaires aux besoins dans notre notice à verser sur WorldCat. Ce qui est bien aussi, c'est qu'on peut sauvegarder nos paramètres, donc ça permet d'aller plus rapidement pour des opérations un peu répétitives. Voilà, donc je voulais quand même vous montrer aussi à quoi ça ressemble, nos notices MARC qu'on produit. Ça, c'en est une pour une maîtrise en mémoire. Donc, voilà ce que ça donne. Et puis, pour les verser sur OCLC, sur WorldCat, on a ce menu-là qui nous permet soit de créer des notices bibliographiques ou des notices de bibliographiques locales, ou encore d'intervenir sur les signalisations WorldCat. Voilà. Donc, c'est terminé pour cette partie-là. Je voulais juste finir en vous donnant un peu les avantages et les inconvénients de cette approche-là. Je dirais que c'est bien parce que ça nous permet vraiment d'utiliser de très belles notices au format MARC et de les rendre accessibles à notre communauté, ce qui permet la mise en valeur des thèses et mémoires sur l'outil de découverte SOFIA et aussi une meilleure recherche sur l'outil de découverte. Par contre, je dirais que c'est assez long à implémenter comme solution. Donc, il faut vraiment analyser ce qui existe déjà sur WorldCat, puis il y a quand même certaines opérations manuelles à faire et le temps de versement est assez long. En fait, c'est l'ordinateur qui travaille, mais quand même, pour 5000 notices, ça prend à peu près 2h30, 3 heures à verser sur WorldCat. Donc, c'est à prendre en considération. Alors, voilà, je sais que la démonstration est allée un peu rapidement, mais n'hésitez pas si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez aussi me contacter par la suite, par courriel, sans problème. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Laurence. So I know we have 5 more minutes with our simultaneous translator, Joseph. So we'll take advantage of that time. I know there's already a couple of questions in the chat that I will ask. And there's one other that Arlene has already responded to. So the first question is from Inba, and I think this is for LAC. She asks, can I presume that we don't need to provide portfolio files? Students can upload individual files? So Arlene and Katherine, if you want to take that one.
Sorry, Inba, what do you mean by portfolio files? Sorry.
I don't know if somebody else. Inba, do you want to turn on your mic and? I don't know if anybody else knows the answer to that.
Well, maybe if I just describe how we get the files, that will answer the question. Our system is looking for a link to a file within the ETDMS record. Our previous harvester would only obtain one PDF, but our current workflow will follow multiple URLs. So you could have a .pdf file, a .csv file, a .mp4, a .mp3, and our workflow will follow all of those files to download them and then package them up with that thesis metadata. So multiple files per thesis, all the supplementary files that are associated with the thesis can be harvested, and we'll preserve them and make them available. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Inba, or not.
I think we may have, Inba may have had to step off the call because I don't see her on the attendee list, but I'll make sure she has a look at the recording to see the answer. And I'm sure she knows how to contact you for more questions. So there is another question from Elizabeth Thompson who asks, how often does LAC return to institutions to harvest newly added theses? So I think that's probably a question many of you have.
Yeah, that's a good question. We're still onboarding, but we did onboard, some universities, almost a year ago. We haven't yet gone around. We're still, trying to put new universities on, so we haven't gone back to the first universities that we harvested last December, January, but we should. But I guess the answer is that when we, are sort of operational with reharvesting, we expect that we would be going back to a university every quarter, perhaps every 3 months. But we can respond to individual requests for maybe harvesting only once per year or every 6 months, or after a certain number of theses have been uploaded. We can do that. It's not going to be set in stone. We can respond to whatever you would prefer.
Great, thank you, Arlene. And I know there was another question in the chat from Keshav Mukunda that you've responded to, and that Marie-Hélène has also weighed in on. So I encourage people to keep an eye on the chat. And I think at this point, we are going to give a big thank you to Joseph Blain for the wonderful translation today.